The sun was warm on his back, a gentle, forgiving heat that felt like a soft blanket. For him, this was freedom. The deep, rumbling purr of the motorcycle beneath him was a familiar song, a rhythm that drowned out the noise of the world. He wasn't a movie star right now, not a face on a poster or a voice in a theater. He was just a man on a bike, navigating the sprawling maze of Los Angeles side streets. He'd taken a turn off a main boulevard, seeking the quieter roads where houses with small, well-kept gardens lined the pavement. It was in one of these quiet neighborhoods that he saw it, a small, green park, almost hidden between two apartment buildings. It looked like a perfect spot to pull over, take a breath, and just be for a moment. He found a spot under the shade of a large oak tree and killed the engine. The sudden silence was just as nice as the roar had been. He pulled off his helmet, letting the cool breeze mess up his hair, and just watched the world go by. An old woman was walking slowly along the path, a tiny, fluffy white dog trotting happily at her heels. She had a gentle smile on her face as she watched the dog sniff at a patch of dandelions. It was a perfectly normal, peaceful scene. The kind of moment you don't notice until it's gone, then everything changed. It wasn't a loud crash or a scream. It was a small, sharp gasp, a sound that was swallowed almost instantly by the quiet afternoon. He turned his head just in time to see the woman crumple. It wasn't a dramatic fall like in the movies. It was more like a puppet whose strings had been cut. Her body simply gave out and she folded onto the grassy path with a soft, sickening thud. The little dog let out a series of panicked yelps, running in tight, confused circles around her still form. For a second, his brain struggled to catch up. One moment, it was a beautiful day. The next, he didn't think. He just moved. The kickstand of his bike snapped down as he swung his leg off, his helmet dropping to the ground with a clatter he didn't even hear. He was running, his boots thudding softly on the grass, covering the 20 yards to her side in what felt like both an instant and an eternity. He knelt beside her. Her eyes were closed and her face was pale, almost a waxy color. He put 2 fingers to her neck, just like they show in the movies, and felt a faint, thready pulse. It was there, but it was weak and fluttery, like a frightened bird. Her chest was barely moving. "Hey," he said, his voice soft but firm. "Can you hear me?" There was no response. The little dog was still whining, nudging its owner's hand with its wet nose. He gently shooed the dog back with one hand while pulling his phone from his pocket with the other. His thumb, surprisingly steady, swiped the screen and dialed 911. As the phone rang, he carefully tilted her head back to open her airway. A small piece of first aid knowledge he hoped he was remembering right. 911? What's your emergency? A calm, professional voice said on the other end. "Hi," he said, his own voice sounding surprisingly calm to his own ears. "I'm at a small park on the corner of Willow Street and Elm Avenue. There's an elderly woman here. She just collapsed. She's unconscious, but she has a pulse. It's weak." He gave the dispatcher the details, his eyes never leaving the woman's face. He answered every question clearly, her approximate age, her breathing, whether she was bleeding. The dispatcher told him an ambulance was on its way and to stay on the line. While he waited, he looked around. The park was still empty. It was just him, the silent woman, and the terrified little dog. He felt a wave of protectiveness wash over him. She was so vulnerable, lying there on the grass. He put the phone on speaker and set it on the ground beside him. "Help is on the way," he said to the woman, even though she couldn't hear him. It felt important to say it anyway. "You're going to be okay." He gently took her hand. It was cool and soft, the skin thin like paper. He just held it, trying to will some of his own strength into her. The dog, sensing a calmer presence, stopped yelping and came to sit beside him, leaning its small body against his leg and letting out a low, worried whine. He reached over and stroked its head with his free hand. "It's all right, little guy," he murmured. "She's going to be all right." He didn't know if that was true, but he had to believe it. The minutes stretched on, each one feeling longer than the last. He could hear the faint, growing wail of a siren in the distance. It was the most beautiful sound he had ever heard. He stayed there, kneeling on the grass, a stranger holding a stranger's hand. A small dog pressed against his side, waiting for help to arrive. He wasn't thinking about his schedule or what anyone else would think. All that mattered was the woman on the ground and the faint, fragile beat of her heart. The ambulance screeched to a halt at the edge of the park, and two paramedics jumped out with a gurney and their medical bags. They moved with a quick, practiced efficiency that was reassuring to see. "What happened?" One of them asked as they knelt on the other side of the woman. He explained what he saw, the sudden collapse, the gasp, how he'd found her. He moved back to give them room, but he didn't leave. He watched as they checked her vitals, put an oxygen mask on her face, and started an IV line. They were professional and focused, and he felt a huge sense of relief. She was in good hands now. As they carefully lifted her onto the gurney, one of the paramedics turned to him. "Are you family?" he asked, looking at the way he had been holding her hand and comforting the dog. He hesitated for just a split second. He saw the look of fear and confusion on the woman's face, even through the oxygen mask. She was alone. This little dog was her only companion, and he was now his. What would happen when she got to the chaotic, impersonal emergency room? Who would speak for her? Who would make sure she wasn't just another anonymous patient in a long line? He thought about his own mother, about how he would want someone to be there for her if he couldn't be. In that moment, the decision was easy. It wasn't a lie to get attention or to see what would happen. It was a lie of compassion. "Yes," he said, his voice clear and sure. "I'm her nephew. I'll follow you to the hospital." The paramedic just nodded, accepting the answer, and they began to wheel the gurney toward the ambulance. He scooped up the little dog, who surprisingly didn't protest, and walked back to his motorcycle. He put the small, trembling animal inside his jacket, zipping it up just enough to keep it safe. He put his helmet back on, his mind already made up. He kicked the bike to life, the roar of the engine now feeling different. It wasn't the sound of freedom anymore. It was the sound of a promise. As the ambulance pulled away with its lights flashing, he fell in line behind it, a silent guardian on a motorcycle, ready to see this through to the end. The emergency room doors slid open with a whoosh of sterile, cool air that carried a strange mix of smells, antiseptic, old coffee, and something metallic like fear. He stepped inside, the little dog tucked securely inside his leather jacket, its small head peeking out with wide, nervous eyes. The calm of the motorcycle ride was gone, replaced by a wall of sound and motion. It was a world of controlled chaos. People in scrubs moved with purpose, their faces masks of concentration. Monitors beeped with insistent, rhythmic chimes. A child was crying somewhere in the distance, a sound that cut through everything else. He felt a surge of anxiety, not for himself, but for the old woman. This place was overwhelming, and she was alone in the middle of it. He walked toward the main reception desk, a large circular island that seemed to be the eye of the storm. A nurse was on the phone, her expression strained as she listened intently, typing rapidly into a computer. Another was sorting a stack of charts, her movements quick and efficient. He stood there for a moment, feeling invisible and out of place in his dusty jacket and boots. He gently stroked the dog's head, a small, calming gesture for them both. Finally, the nurse on the phone hung up and turned to him, her eyes tired. "Can I help you?" "Yes," he said, his voice soft so as not to add to the noise. "I'm here for an elderly woman who was just brought in. She collapsed at a park. Her name is—" He trailed off, realizing he didn't even know her name. "I was with her when the ambulance arrived." The nurse's expression softened a little. "Are you family?" "Yes," he said, the lie feeling heavier now that he was saying it inside the hospital walls. "I'm her nephew." "They're still working on her in Trauma Bay too," the nurse said, pointing down a long hallway that was cordoned off by a sliding curtain. "You'll have to wait here, sir. The doctor will come out and talk to you as soon as he can." He nodded. "Thank you. Is there somewhere I can put this little guy?" He opened his jacket slightly to reveal the small, white dog. The nurse managed a small, tired smile. "Wow, okay, you can't have him in here. Health codes? Maybe just outside." Or in your car. He'll be scared, he said simply. I'll wait over here, out of the way. He moved to a quiet corner of the waiting area, a small cluster of uncomfortable plastic chairs. He sat down, the dog squirming a little before settling into a warm ball against his chest. He tried to be inconspicuous, to blend into the background. But it wasn't working. People were starting to look. A double take from a man with a bandaged hand. A whispered nudge between two teenage girls. A phone was subtly raised, then quickly lowered. He was used to being noticed, but here, in this place of sickness and worry, it felt wrong. It felt like he was a distraction. A sideshow in a place where serious things were happening. Down the hall, the doctor was having a day from hell. He was running on 3 hours of sleep and what felt like his 10th cup of coffee. He had already treated 2 car accident victims, a child with a severe asthma attack, and a man having a heart attack. His mind was a whirlwind of patient charts, drug dosages, and split-second decisions. He was a good doctor, one of the best, but the constant pressure was wearing him down to a raw, frayed nerve. He believed in order above all else. In his there was no room for chaos, no time for distractions. Every second counted, and anything that got in the way of his work was an enemy to be. Defeated, he had just finished stabilizing the elderly woman from the park. She was dehydrated and had a severe infection, but she was stable now. They were moving her to a room for observation. As he was giving final instructions to a nurse, he felt a change in the atmosphere of his department. The usual focused hum was punctuated by a low, excited murmur. He looked up, his eyes scanning the waiting area. That's when he saw it. A small crowd was beginning to form, not a real crowd, but a gathering of pointing and whispering. And at the center of it was a man in a leather jacket, a man who looked vaguely familiar, a man who was clearly not a patient and was drawing attention away from where it should be, on the sick and injured. A flash of irritation, hot and sharp, shot through him. He had no time for this. No time for gawkers or long-lost relatives who thought they could just waltz into his trauma bay. He saw the man trying to talk to another nurse, gesturing down the hall toward where his patient had just been. That was it. That was the breaking point. He strode down the hallway, his white coat billowing behind him like a cape. His face was a stony mask of authority. He didn't care who the man was, a celebrity or a king. He was the one in charge. "Sir," he said, his voice low and firm, cutting through the nurse's apologetic words. The man turned, and the doctor saw his face up close. He did recognize him now from some movie or another, but that only made his anger burn hotter. A celebrity thinking the rules didn't apply to him. It was a classic tale. "This is a restricted area. You can't be here." "I know, I'm sorry," the man said, his voice calm and reasonable. "I was just trying to get an update on my aunt," the nurse at the desk said. "I don't care what the nurse said," the doctor snapped, his voice rising slightly. He immediately lowered it, not wanting to cause more of a scene. "I am the attending physician. Everyone in this waiting room has an emergency. Everyone here is worried about someone. You are not special. You are causing a disruption, and I will not have it in my department." He took a step closer, invading the man's personal space, using his height and his authority to their full effect. "You need to go back to the main lobby and wait like everyone else. If you don't, I will have security escort you out. Do you understand?" The man just looked at him, his expression unreadable. There was no anger, no arrogance, just a quiet sort of surprise. He gave a slow, single nod. "Yeah, I understand." He glanced down the hall, a clear look of concern on his face, then back at the doctor. Is she going to be okay?" "She's stable for now," the doctor said, his tone clipped and professional. He wasn't going to give any more information. He had made his point. He turned and walked away without another word, satisfied that order had been restored. He didn't look back. He had patients to see, lives to save. He quickly pushed the encounter from his mind, just another small fire to be put out on a very long, very difficult day. The man stood there for a moment, the weight of the doctor's words settling over him. He felt the eyes of everyone in the waiting room on him. He felt the small dog tremble against his chest. He wasn't angry, just deflated. He had only wanted to help. With a quiet sigh, he turned and walked away from the trauma bay, away from the whispers and the pointing fingers. He found a more secluded spot near the main entrance, tucked away behind a large potted plant. He sank into one of the hard plastic chairs, the dog whining softly. He unzipped his jacket a little more. "It's okay," he whispered to the dog and to himself. "It's okay. We'll just wait here." He leaned his head back against the wall, the noise of the fading into a dull roar as he stared at the ceiling. Lost in his own thoughts, just a man in a waiting room, hoping for the best. The doctor walked away from the confrontation, a small, dark part of him feeling a grim satisfaction. Order had been restored. The disruption was gone. He pushed the incident from his mind, refocusing his energy on the sea of sick and injured people that needed him. He moved from one exam bay to the next, his mind a whirlwind of medical facts, diagnoses, and treatment plans. He was a machine, efficient and focused, and that's how he survived the chaos of the emergency room. He checked on the elderly woman from the park one last time before they moved her to an observation room upstairs. Her vitals were stable, her color was better. She was out of the immediate danger zone. He felt a professional sense of a job well done. A nurse approached him, holding a small, worn-looking purse. "Doctor, this is hers. We need to get her information for the admission paperwork upstairs." He took the purse with a nod. "All right, I'll get her ID and insurance card." He walked over to a small, cluttered desk in the corner of the nurse's station, a small island of relative quiet in the storm. He sat down on a wobbly stool and opened the purse. It was a simple thing, old and well used, with a clasp that was difficult to open. Inside it was a universe of a person's life. There were old receipts, a pack of tissues, a few mints wrapped in crinkling plastic, and a small chipped compact. It felt strangely intimate, like he was peeking into a private world. He found her wallet, a simple leather fold that was soft from years of use. He opened it and pulled out her driver's license. Her name was Eleanor Vance. The picture showed a younger version of the woman on the gurney, her hair still dark, a warm, gentle smile on her face. He noted her date of birth and address, scribbling the information on a sticky note. He found her insurance card and placed it next to the license. Just another routine task, another piece of the puzzle to make the system run smoothly. As he went to slide the license back into its clear plastic sleeve, something else slipped out from behind it. It was a single, cream-colored business card. It wasn't like the usual cards from dentists or lawyers. It was thick with a simple, elegant font. He picked it up, expecting to see the name of a retirement home or perhaps a family member's contact number. But what he saw made his breath catch in his throat. It read, ***, the Vance Jun Medical Scholarship Foundation. ***, underneath in smaller italicized print were the names, ***, Eleanor Vance, founder, and Dr. Althea Chun. In MEMORAM. The world around him seemed to slow down. The frantic beeping of monitors and the hurried footsteps of nurses fading into a distant muffle. Vance Chun. The name echoed in the hollows of his memory, a name from a lifetime ago. He was no longer a seasoned doctor in a chaotic, he was a scared, exhausted young man, sitting in a tiny, sparsely furnished apartment, the smell of instant noodles filling the air. He was staring at a mountain of student loan debt, a number so large it felt like a physical weight on his chest. He was holding a letter, a thin, flimsy envelope that contained another tuition bill, a reminder that his dream of becoming a doctor was slipping through his fingers. He was so tired. He'd been working 2 jobs, studying until his eyes burned, and for what? To be told he was one missed payment away from being kicked out of medical school. He had crumpled the letter in his hand, a wave of despair washing over him so strong it felt like it might drown him. He was going to have to quit. The dream was over, then he remembered. A flyer he'd seen on a bulletin board at school, tucked between dozens of others offering tutoring services and rooms for rent. It was for a scholarship he'd never heard of, a small, private foundation. It was a long shot, a desperate, last-ditch effort, but with nothing left to lose, he had applied. He poured his heart into the essay, writing not about his grades or his ambitions, but about why he needed to be a doctor. He wrote about wanting to give people a second chance, to be there for people on their worst day. The way no one had been there for his own family when they'd faced a medical crisis. Weeks went by. He'd almost forgotten about it, resigned to his fate. Then the email came. An interview. He'd borrowed his father's only suit, a slightly too big jacket and pants that were a little too short. He'd sat in a plush waiting room, his hands sweating, feeling completely out of place. And then a woman with kind eyes and a warm smile had called his name, Dr. Althea Chun. She didn't look like a stuffy, rich benefactor. She looked like a real person. She didn't ask him about his test scores. She asked him why he looked so tired. She asked him what made him want to help people. He had told her everything, his voice cracking with emotion at times. He'd been raw and honest, expecting a polite rejection. Instead, she had smiled that warm, disarming smile and said the words that changed his life. "We believe in investing in passion, not just in grades," she had told him. "We see a fire in you. Don't ever let that fire go out." She told him the scholarship would cover his remaining tuition, his books, his living expenses. It was a lifeline thrown into a stormy sea. It was everything. He had stammered his thanks, tears welling in his eyes, and she had just patted his hand and told him to go be a great doctor. He later learned that Dr. Chun had passed away a few years after he graduated, but her legacy lived on through the foundation. He had always meant to look up the other name. The Vance in the foundation's title, but life, as it so often does, had gotten in the way. He'd never gotten around to it, until now. He was back in the noisy, bright, the card was trembling in his hand. He looked from the name Eleanor Vance, founder to the pale, still woman lying in the hospital bed a few feet away. It was her. This was the woman who, along with Dr. Chun, had made his entire career possible. This was the woman who had invested in his passion when he had nothing else to offer. He was a doctor today because of her. He was standing in this very hospital, saving lives, because of her kindness and her belief in giving people a chance. And then, a second more horrifying wave of realization crashed over him. He remembered the man in the leather jacket, the man who had brought her here. The man he had just publicly humiliated and kicked out of the He hadn't been a celebrity looking for attention. He had been a good Samaritan, a stranger who had cared enough to follow an elderly woman to the hospital and make sure she was okay. He was the one who had stayed with her, who had comforted her, who had brought her here. And he, the doctor, the man whose entire life had been made possible by this very woman, had treated him with contempt and disrespect. The irony was so thick, so suffocating it felt like a physical blow. The professional mask, the armor of efficiency and authority he wore every day, shattered into a million pieces. He was left standing there, speechless, holding a small card, his entire world turned upside down in the blink of an eye. The card in his hand felt like it was made of lead, pulling his arm down, anchoring him to the spot. The noise of the emergency room, which he had learned to tune out over the years, came rushing back in a disorienting wave. The beeping of a heart monitor, the squeak of a gurney's wheels on the linoleum floor, the hushed, urgent conversations of the nurses, it all blended into a loud, chaotic symphony that made his head throb. He felt a cold sweat break out on his forehead. His carefully constructed world of order and efficiency had just been shattered by a single small piece of cardstock. He was a fraud. The whole foundation of his career, the very reason he was standing here in this white coat, was because of the woman in that room, a woman he had treated as just another chart number. And the man who had brought her here, the man he had treated with such contempt, was the person who had made sure she got to him safely. A wave of nausea washed over him. He leaned against the nurse's station for support, his knuckles white as he gripped the countertop. He saw the man's face again in his mind's eye, the calm, concerned expression, the lack of anger or arrogance even as he was being berated. The doctor had seen him as a problem, an obstacle, a celebrity who thought the rules didn't apply. But he wasn't any of those things. He was just a person who had done the right thing. And he, the doctor, had punished him for it. The irony was so bitter it tasted like ash in his mouth. He thought of Dr. Chun, her kind eyes, her words echoing in his ears. We believe in investing in passion, not just in grades. What would she think of him now? He had the passion, once. But somewhere along the way, buried under mountains of paperwork and endless hours of sleepless shifts, it had been replaced by a hard shell of cynicism and a desperate need for control. He had forgotten that the patients on the tables were not just problems to be solved, but people with stories, with lives that connected to other lives in ways he could never imagine. He had to fix this. It wasn't about saving face. It was about doing what was right. He took a deep, shaky breath and pushed himself away from the counter. His legs felt unsteady, like he was learning to walk all over again. He handed the purse and the license to a nearby nurse. "Get this admitted," he said, his voice hoarse and unfamiliar. "Mrs. Vance, up to observation. I'll be right back." He didn't wait for a reply. He started walking, his stride not its usual confident, purposeful pace, but a hesitant, almost shuffling walk. He felt like everyone was looking at him, like they could see the shame written all over his face. He pushed through the sliding glass doors that separated the clinical chaos of the A from the general waiting area. A place he rarely ventured into, the waiting room was a different kind of chaos. It was a chaos of worry. It was filled with people hunched in uncomfortable plastic chairs, their faces etched with anxiety. A woman cradled a crying baby, rocking back and forth. A man stared at his phone, his thumb frozen mid-scroll, his face pale. A family huddled together, speaking in low, urgent tones. He had always seen this room as a place to be managed, a holding pen for the non-urgent. But now he felt like he belonged here. He was just another person, waiting and worrying. His heart pounding in his chest, his eyes scanned the crowd, searching for the man in the leather jacket. He wasn't hard to spot. He wasn't in the middle of the room, drawing attention. He was tucked away in a quiet corner, hidden behind a large, leafy, potted ficus tree, almost as if he were trying to become a part of it. He was slumped in a chair, his head leaning back against the wall, his eyes closed. The little white dog was asleep on his lap, tucked safely inside his jacket. He looked exhausted. He looked like a man who had been through a lot, a man who was simply trying to do a good deed and had ended up in a nightmare. The doctor stood there for a long moment, just watching him. He was afraid to move. What could he possibly say? "Sorry I was a jerk. By the way, the woman you helped is the reason I'm not flipping burgers somewhere." It sounded ridiculous. It was ridiculous. But he had to say something. He forced his feet to move, one step at a time, across the tiled floor. The squeak of his shoes on the clean surface sounded like a gunshot in the quiet corner. The man must have heard him coming, because his eyes opened. They were tired, but there was no hint of anger or resentment in them, just a quiet question. He sat up a little straighter, causing the dog to stir with a soft whine. The doctor stopped a few feet away, his hands clasped in front of him, the business card still clutched in his fingers. He opened his mouth, but no words came out. He felt like a schoolboy who had been sent to the principal's office. He took another breath and tried again. "Sir," he began, his voice barely a whisper. He cleared his throat and tried again, a little louder this time. "Sir, I am so sorry." The man just looked at him, his expression calm and patient. He waited for him to continue. "I had no idea," the doctor stammered, his words tumbling over each other. I was having a very difficult day. That's not an excuse. There's no excuse for how I behaved. I was rude and I was unprofessional and I was just wrong." He held out the business card, his hand trembling slightly. "I was looking through her purse to get her information for admission, and I found this." The man took the card, his brow furrowed slightly as he read the words. "The Vance Jun Medical Scholarship Foundation," he read aloud, his voice soft. He looked up at the doctor, confusion in his eyes. The doctor finally met his gaze, and he felt the last of his professional crumble away. "That foundation, it's why I'm here. It's why I'm a doctor at all. I was a medical student years ago. I was about to drop out. I had no money, no hope. And this foundation, Dr. Chun, She gave me a scholarship. She saved my dream. She made my entire life possible. He gestured vaguely back toward the trauma bays. That woman in there, Mrs. Vance. She's the Vance in the Foundation's name. She's the reason I'm standing here today. And you brought her to me. And I treated you like garbage. He couldn't go on. He just stood there, his head bowed, completely and utterly speechless, waiting for the judgment he knew he deserved. The man looked from the card back to the doctor's face. A slow look of understanding dawned on his features. He didn't look angry. He didn't look smug. He just looked thoughtful. He was quiet for a long moment, the dog in his jacket letting out a soft sigh. Finally he spoke, his voice gentle and kind. She's a tough lady. I'm glad I could help. He paused, then added, the important thing is that she's in good hands now. The doctor was stunned. He had prepared himself for anger, for a sarcastic remark, for a call to the hospital administrator. He had not prepared for grace. But I kicked you out, he said, his voice filled with disbelief. The man gave a small, almost imperceptible shrug. You're busy. You have a lot of people to take care of. I get it. He looked down at the card again, then back at the doctor. That's a pretty incredible story, though. A small world. The doctor felt a wave of emotion so strong it almost brought him to his knees. This man, whom he had treated so poorly, was comforting him. I need to make this right, he said, his voice gaining a little strength. Please, let me give you a proper update on her condition. She's stable. We're moving her upstairs for observation. It was a severe infection, leading to dehydration and a fainting spell, but she's responding well to the antibiotics. She's going to be okay. A look of genuine relief washed over the man's face. That's the best news I've heard all day, he said, a small, tired smile finally touching his lips. Thank you. Thank you for telling me. The doctor stood there for a moment longer, feeling the weight of his mistake, but also feeling something else, a lightness. The hard shell around his heart had cracked, and something was growing in its place. He wasn't just a doctor who treated illnesses. He was a part of a community, a web of human connection that he had been ignoring for far too long. He had been reminded of it in the most humbling way imaginable, by a movie star and a little white dog. The silence that followed his confession was heavier than any sound the doctor had ever heard in the emergency room. It was a clean, quiet space, filled not with noise, but with understanding. The man in the leather jacket simply looked at him, his expression a mixture of empathy and quiet relief. He didn't say, I told you so, or you should have been nicer. He just nodded, a slow, deliberate movement that seemed to say more than words ever could. The doctor felt a knot of tension in his shoulders that he hadn't even realized was there begin to loosen. Come with me, the doctor said, his voice still soft, but now with a new sense of purpose. The main waiting room is no place for anyone, let alone. Well, for anyone. He led the way, not back toward the chaos of the A, but down a different, quieter hallway. He swiped his keycard at a plain, unmarked door and held it open. This is the doctor's lounge. It's empty right now. You can wait here. It's quiet. Inside, the room was simple. A few worn-out couches, a coffee machine gurgling in the corner, a small table piled with old medical journals. It was a sanctuary, a place for a moment of peace. Can I get you a coffee? Or water? Coffee would be great, thank you, the man said, carefully sitting down on one of the couches. He gently unzipped his jacket, and the little white dog jumped down. Curiously sniffing the unfamiliar floor, the doctor went to the coffee machine, his hands moving with a newfound care. He wasn't just making a cup of coffee. He was performing a small act of service, a tiny gesture to begin to repay a debt of gratitude that was too large to ever truly be repaid. As he waited for the coffee to drip, he leaned against the counter and looked at the man. I don't even know your name, he said. The man gave a small, almost shy smile. You can just call me John. John, the doctor repeated. I'm the doctor who was having a very bad day and made it worse for everyone else. He handed the warm mug to John. That foundation, the scholarship, it changed everything for me. I was working 3 jobs, my grades were slipping, I was living on instant noodles and about 4 hours of sleep a night. I was a month away from being kicked out of med school. Dr. Chun, she saw something in me I didn't even see in myself anymore. She saved me. John listened quietly, sipping his coffee. Sounds like she was a special person. She was, the doctor agreed, his eyes distant. And Mrs. Vance? I never even thought about the other name. I was so focused on my own struggle, I never stopped to think about the people who made it possible. I forgot. He looked down at his hands. I got so caught up in the how of being a doctor, the science, the procedures, the efficiency that I forgot about the why. The reason I wanted to do this in the first place. You reminded me. John just shook his head. I didn't do anything. Anyone would have done the same. No, the doctor said, his voice firm. Not everyone would. But you did, and I'm grateful. He stood up straighter. I need to get back to work. But please, stay here as long as you need. I'll come and find you as soon as I have a real update on Mrs. Vance. When he walked back onto the floor, it was like seeing the world in color for the first time in years. The beeping monitors weren't just noise. They were the sound of a heart still beating. The cries of a child weren't an annoyance. They were a call for help. He saw a young intern, a woman with a look of panic on her face as she tried to draw blood from a patient with difficult veins. The old him would have barked an order, taken over, and done it himself, frustrated by her lack of experience. But the new him walked over, put a gentle hand on her shoulder, and said, "Breathe. Let's try together. Try a smaller needle, and let's warm the arm first." He guided her, and a few moments later they had success. He gave her an encouraging smile. You did good. The look of relief on her face was a reward he hadn't felt in a long time. A few hours later, after his shift had ended, he went up to the observation floor. Eleanor Vance was awake, sitting up in bed and looking much better. Her color had returned and her eyes were clear. He knocked softly on her doorframe. Mrs. Vance? I'm the doctor from the emergency room. How are you feeling? A bit like I was hit by a truck, she said, her voice a little weak but laced with humor. But much better, thank you. The nurse told me I had a bad infection. I can't believe I fainted. I feel so silly. You're not silly at all, he said warmly, pulling a chair up to her bed. You were very sick, but you're going to be just fine. I want to tell you, you had a guardian angel today. A man found you in the park right after you collapsed. He stayed with you, called for help, and followed the ambulance here to make sure you were okay. He was very worried about you. Eleanor's eyes softened. Oh my, that's so kind. I don't even know who he is. He's just a good person, the doctor said. He also took care of your little dog. Just then, there was a soft knock on the door. It was John, peeking his head in, the little white dog in his arms. Eleanor's face lit up. Buster! She cried, her arms outstretched. John walked in and gently placed the dog on the bed. The little dog, Buster, immediately licked his owner's face, his tail wagging so hard his whole body wiggled. It was a perfect, happy moment. Thank you, Eleanor said to John, her eyes filled with tears. Thank you for everything. John just smiled his humble smile. Of course. I'm just so glad you're okay. He looked at the doctor and gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. It was a goodbye. He had done what he set out to do. He said his goodbyes to Eleanor, promised to check on her soon, and quietly slipped out of the room, disappearing back into his own life, leaving the ripples of his kindness behind. The story became a legend in that hospital, but not in the way you might think. The doctor never told people he had kicked a famous actor out of the when he told the story, which he often did to new, overwhelmed interns. He would say, one day a man came into my hospital. He was a stranger who had done a wonderful thing for someone else. And in my arrogance and stress, I treated him poorly. That man, through his simple act of decency, reminded me that every patient has a story, and every person who walks through our doors deserves our compassion, no matter how busy we are or what they look like. He taught me that the most important thing we can treat is not the disease, but the human being in front of us. The doctor changed that day. He started a small fund at the hospital, using his own money to help patients who couldn't afford their medication. He mentored struggling medical students, just as Dr. Chun had mentored him, telling them, "We invest in passion, not just grades." And every year he made a large, anonymous donation to the Vansgen Medical Scholarship Foundation, paying forward the gift that had changed his life. A gift that had been delivered to him on a day he least expected it, by a quiet man on a motorcycle and a little white dog.